victim. I highly recommend that you take a look at what they have to offer and dive into the material that you are most interested in. As the story goes, 3 Roman legions and their auxiliaries entered the forests of Germania in 9 AD and met their doom at the hands of the traitor Arminius and his cleverly laid trap. The fighting occurred in stages over several days, as the Roman column was slowly gnawed upon and eventually swallowed whole. Seeing this inevitable doom upon them, the Imperial Officer Corps and General Varus himself committed suicide. After the Roman army had completed its convulsive death throes, the entire forest must have come to an ominous still. It's hard to imagine just what that transition must have felt like, as the violent yells of some 20,000 dead or captured gave way to the chirping of birds. What happened next is not clear, as we have no direct sources on the matter from the victor's perspective. However, we can start to get an idea from a few key Roman writers like Tacitus, combined with our understanding of warfare from the period, as well as the findings of modern archaeology. The first people to set foot on the battlefield once the fighting had ended would have been the victorious German tribes. Several immediate goals were in order: hunting down survivors, tending to the dead, and taking prizes. The first order of business would already have begun over the course of the battle and extended several days after. The author Paterculus, for instance, mentions an instance of Roman horsemen abandoning the main body of infantry during the assault and fleeing for the Rhine, only to be slain along the way. Elsewhere, it seems that groups of soldiers or individuals melted away into the surrounding woods and marshes seeking refuge. The Germans, however, knew that this was their chance to inflict as much damage as possible to the enemy, and would not have allowed their quarry to slip so easily through their net. After all, they were the masters of this land, and would have held the advantage in such a deadly hunt. Archaeology of the area reveals incredible stories of the pursuit that occurred. For instance, near a portion of the Germanic wall, a bell was found still attached to the neck of a mule. It was stuffed full of grass, indicating that some panicked Roman soldiers had attempted to silence it in their desperation to avoid detection, while listening to the cries of their comrades being slaughtered around them. It's unlikely that their efforts were successful. Other stories are small and similarly terrifying. The small scatterings of coins that tell of an officer's purse that spilled across the muddy ground, the small caches where soldiers dug holes for their money, the clasps from armor that were torn off of the bodies, the surgeon's tools all lying together as the medics themselves were killed or taken captive. We do know, though, that some Roman soldiers did manage to make it out of this living hellscape alive and fall back to their own lines, regrouping at the last standing fortress of Aliso. However, the percentage of those who achieved such an escape was quite low. Meanwhile, the Germans would have begun their second initiative, tending to the dead. The tribesmen were sure to comb over the battlefield, recovering as many of their own as possible. Any wounded allies would be quickly brought to their own healers, while any Roman survivors were generally dispatched with a spear thrust to the neck. Those Germans who could not be saved, or who had already perished, would have been brought back to their own villages, where funeral arrangements could be made. Such ceremonies varied from locale to locale, but typically involved the dead being placed on a pyre, a speech being delivered by the head of the community, and the body being burned by the deceased individual's surviving family. The warrior's weaponry might accompany him in the fire, be placed alongside his ashes in a grave, or stay with the family, which kept his burnt remains in a treasured urn to be passed down through the generations. The Romans suffered a far less solemn and honorable fate. Like many other cultures around the world, the Germans took prisoners after a victory in battle. The lucky ones would be carted off to face a life of servitude. The unlucky ones would be sacrificed to the gods. It seems that this act could take many forms. Tacitus mentions how special altars had been prepared for prominent centurions and tribunes. Tradition dictated that such victims would be treated just like any other animal offering. As such, a priest would oversee the affair, chanting a prayer to the subject deity while preparing to wield the sacred knife. Roman sources claim that the actual killing would only come once the victim had assented to the rite. For livestock, this would be done by using a rope to induce a vow from the animal. It's easy to imagine the same being done to their Roman replacements. Once this step had been completed, the priest would slash the victim's neck, allowing the blood to spill over the altar, the priest, and the land itself. Other victims were ritualistically hung from oak trees. The practice involved teams of men raising the captive with a rope, slowly strangling the victim while a priest chanted his prayers. Yet more sacrificial practices called for decapitation, with the severed heads being nailed to the trees as a way to demarcate an entire area as a gruesome temple to victory. Finally, some Romans were simply just thrown into marshes, already considered to be sacred ground, as both an offering and a thanks to the gods in the dark recesses of the woods. But such special attention could not be paid to the tens of thousands of Roman vanquished. The rest would be afforded no honors or holy rites. They would be cleared from the road, which was still important